I never expected my homecoming to feel like an invasion. After months away on a high-stakes project, all I wanted was to return to my own bed, in my own house, next to the woman I had promised my life to. The drive back felt endless, my thoughts tangled in warm memories of Jessica's embrace, the soft glow of the bedside lamp as she read late into the night, the scent of her perfume lingering on my clothes. I had imagined this reunion 1,000 times, her arms around me, her laughter, the whispered confessions of how much she had missed me. Instead, I walked into a stranger's home. The first sign was the scent. Something unfamiliar clung to the air, heavy and intrusive, cologne, thick and musky, one I had never worn. My body tensed before my mind caught up, a primitive instinct clawing at the edges of my sanity. The furniture was slightly different, the coffee table nudged at an unfamiliar angle, the throw pillows missing from the couch. Little details, but they screamed at me like alarms. Then my eyes landed on the missing wedding photo from the entryway table. A hole remained where it had once stood, a void as stark as the one growing inside my chest. My heart pounded. I stepped further inside, my breathing shallow, and that's when I heard it, the soft rustle of sheets, the hushed murmur of voices from the bedroom. The room I shared with my wife. I moved forward, feet numb against the hardwood floor. Each step felt like wading through quicksand, my pulse roaring in my ears. The door was ajar, and through the sliver of space, I saw them. Jessica. In our bed. With someone else. The sheet barely covered them, tangled around their bodies like the web of lies I hadn't known I was trapped in. Her hair was disheveled, her skin still flushed, her back half turned toward me as if she could somehow shield herself from the weight of her betrayal. But it wasn't Jessica who sent my world shattering into a million pieces. It was the man beside her. Richard. My father. He lay there as if he belonged, sprawled across my side of the bed, his silvered hair damp with sweat. His expression wasn't one of guilt or shame. No. It was something far worse, indifference. Like this was just another evening, just another part of his life, like he hadn't just gutted his own son. A cold, jagged silence filled the space between us. Jessica made a weak attempt to cover herself, but it was performative at best, an instinct rather than actual regret. She didn't scramble for excuses. She didn't even look afraid of being caught. If anything, she looked annoyed. My breath came in shallow gasps, the betrayal so deep it felt like my lungs had collapsed. I wanted to scream, to tear the entire house apart, to demand answers, but there was nothing to say that could fix what was already broken. Jessica moved first, shifting lazily as if she had all the time in the world. The way she glanced at me, casual, almost condescending, turned my stomach. She wasn't sorry. Not even a little. There was no hesitation in her tone, no waver in her voice. Just a simple, brutal declaration that took a sledgehammer to whatever illusions I had left. She didn't stammer out a weak apology, didn't plead for forgiveness, didn't try to soften the blow. She had already moved past that. The room spun. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, my entire body vibrating with something I couldn't yet name. Betrayal was too small of a word. This was annihilation. My father remained silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. He didn't try to justify it, didn't fumble for excuses or explanations. Maybe because there was nothing to say that would make this anything less than monstrous. He had been in this house as a guest, as family, as someone I trusted. And he had repaid that trust by taking everything I held sacred and defiling it. Jessica sat up then, wrapping the sheet around herself, as if that did anything to hide the damage. Her face was unreadable, but there was something calculating in her gaze. She wasn't scrambling to make things right, she was already deciding how to twist the knife further. And then she made her final move. With an exhale, she leaned back against the headboard, her lips curving ever so slightly. "We're in love. You should leave." A command. Not a request. Not an attempt to explain. Just a flat, emotionless statement, delivered with the confidence of someone who had already written me out of their life. The words didn't even feel real. The sheer audacity of it all, the lack of remorse, the arrogance, it stole whatever breath I had left. I wanted to believe this was a nightmare. That I had fallen asleep on the long drive home and was caught in some fever dream that I would jolt awake from. But the sharp bite of reality was undeniable. The scent of sweat and cologne. The imprint of their bodies in the sheets. The absence of guilt. Jessica had never been caught in a moment of weakness. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. The realization settled like lead in my stomach. I had walked into my own execution, only to find that my killers had already moved on, their weapons discarded, their hands wiped clean. For a long moment, I just stood there, absorbing it all. Letting the weight of the truth sink into my bones. There was nothing left for me in this room. Not love, not loyalty, not even respect. I turned on my heel and walked out. Jessica didn't call after me. Richard didn't try to stop me. That hurt the most. The ease with which they let me go, as if I had been nothing but a placeholder in my own life. But they had underestimated me. Because I wasn't leaving forever. I was leaving to plan. And when I came back, it wouldn't be for closure. It would be for revenge. Jessica wasted no time replacing me. The bed was still warm from where I used to sleep, and yet my father had already claimed my spot. The house I had built, the life I had planned, it was all handed over like a second-hand gift, without hesitation, without guilt. In the days that followed, I became a ghost in my own world. Friends who once smiled at me now offered looks of pity, whispering behind my back. My father, once a man I respected, strutted around town as if he had won some grand prize. And Jessica? She moved with an ease that cut deeper than I thought possible, as if my absence had been a relief rather than a loss. The divorce papers came quickly. Irreconcilable differences. A neat, sterile phrase for what had truly happened. She expected me to sign without a fight, to accept my fate like some discarded relic. But I wasn't done yet. A week after I left, the real betrayal surfaced. Jessica still had access to our shared bank accounts, and she had wasted no time in bleeding them dry. My money I had earned, saved, and planned for our future, was now financing weekend getaways with my father. Fancy dinners, new clothes, expensive watches. Their little love affair was being funded by the very man they had discarded. That realization did something to me. The initial grief, the crushing weight of betrayal, transformed into something sharper, more focused. The fire in my gut turned cold, simmering into something dangerous. I needed proof. Checking my accounts, I saw the withdrawals stacking up, each one more brazen than the last. A 5-star hotel. A boutique jewelry store. A high-end steakhouse. Every charge was another slap in the face. And my father? The man who had once lectured me about responsibility, about hard work and loyalty, he had no shame in spending what wasn't his. I kept quiet. I let them think I was too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. I was watching. Then came the final insult. I returned to the house to collect my things, expecting awkward silence or some forced attempt at civility. Instead, Jessica met me at the door, arms crossed, amusement flickering in her eyes. She had won, and she wanted me to know it. Mockery dripped from every word she spoke. I had always been so predictable, she mused. So routine, so safe. A good husband, yes, but never exciting. Never a real man. The words slid from her lips like poison, designed to wound, to remind me of my supposed failures. My father sat nearby, watching the exchange like an amused spectator. He didn't defend me, didn't look ashamed. If anything, there was a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. I had never hit a man in my life. Never raised my fist in anger. But in that moment, I understood the kind of rage that could drive a man to violence. I gritted my teeth and swallowed the urge. Instead, I nodded. Slowly. Calmly. "All right, Jessica. You win." The smirk that spread across her face was instant, like a reflex. She had expected defeat, anticipated my submission. In her mind, she had broken me completely. She didn't realize that I wasn't admitting defeat. I was setting the stage for her downfall. Over the next few weeks, I played my part well. I moved out quietly, keeping my head down, avoiding any public scenes. To the outside world, I looked like the abandoned husband, the man who had lost everything. And while they basked in their stolen happiness, I started my work. First, I closed every account she had access to. No warning. No gradual withdrawals. Just a complete, abrupt shut-off. Within hours, her shopping spree came to a screeching halt. No more 5-star meals. No more designer outfits. The hotel they had planned to visit? Cancelled. Jessica's credit card? Declined. I imagined the moment she realized what had happened, the confusion, the growing panic. The moment of realization that her free ride was over. Then, I reached out to an old friend, Ryan, a private investigator. I wanted dirt. Something I could use. Not just to win in court, but to ruin them completely. Ryan didn't disappoint. The first thing he uncovered was Jessica's pattern. She hadn't just betrayed me with my father, she had been testing the waters for years. Other men. Some brief, some recurring. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was a chronic liar, a woman who thrived on deception. And Richard? My father had a history I never knew about. Business dealings that had gone sour. A quiet but steady string of financial failures. It turned out his moral compass had been skewed for years, I had just been too blind to see it. But that wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed something personal. Something that would stick. It was a chance encounter that gave me exactly what I needed. A conversation overheard at a local pharmacy. A woman at the counter, picking up a prescription. She mentioned something about a recent doctor's visit. About an unexpected test result. That's when it clicked. Richard had been to the doctor recently. I had seen the unopened letter from his physician on the kitchen counter when I had visited. He had brushed it off as nothing important. What if it was important? I paid a visit to the hospital. A few carefully placed words. A conversation with an acquaintance who owed me a favor. And suddenly, a new medical record was printed, stamped, and sealed. Incurable. Highly contagious. A disease that Jessica would definitely have by now. I didn't need to send an explanation. Just the cold, hard truth in black and white. The moment they opened that envelope, their entire world would collapse. And I would be watching. Waiting. Because their downfall wasn't coming with fire and fury. It was coming with quiet, merciless precision. The moment Jessica's card declined, I knew the fun had begun. She had gotten used to spending my money freely, treating herself and Richard to expensive luxuries as if they were entitled to them. She probably hadn't even considered the possibility that I'd take control. But I had been patient. I had let her believe she was untouchable. And now, just as she thought she had everything secured, I pulled the rug out from under her. First, the shared accounts were closed. No more expensive dinners, no more jewelry, no more weekends in lavish hotels. Whatever savings she thought she could depend on vanished overnight. I imagined the look on her face when the cashier told her there were insufficient funds, the growing frustration when her backup cards failed, the way Richard would suddenly start looking at her differently, as if she had lost her shine. But that was just the beginning. Ryan, my private investigator, had been working quietly in the background, and what he uncovered was far worse than I had expected. Richard wasn't just a man who betrayed his son for a woman. He was a con artist, a man with a history of questionable business deals and shady financial maneuvers. Ryan found records of failed investments, money funneled into accounts under different names, lawsuits settled out of court. My father had been walking a tightrope for years, barely keeping himself afloat. And Jessica? She had never been the loyal wife she pretended to be, not to me, and not even to Richard. The moment my financial resources dried up, she had started looking elsewhere. Ryan had followed her movements, tracking her as she entertained new opportunities. A younger man, someone she had met at the gym. A well-dressed businessman she had dinner with just a few nights prior. She had latched onto Richard for comfort and money, but now that the money was gone, she was already positioning herself for the next best thing. Jessica wasn't just unfaithful, she was a serial manipulator, always securing her next landing before letting go of the last. The irony was almost poetic. Richard had stolen my wife, but he hadn't realized she was only with him for as long as he could provide. And now that I had cut off her resources, he had become useless to her. But my real revenge wouldn't be financial. No, that was too simple. Too clean. I needed something that would stick. The medical report had been delivered, and I knew it had detonated like a bomb inside their relationship. The moment Richard opened that envelope and saw the diagnosis, panic would have set in. There was no way Jessica hadn't received a copy of the same results. I could only imagine the chaos. Jessica, realizing she had been exposed to something irreversible. Richard, accusing her of infecting him. The two of them, screaming at each other, blaming each other, wondering who had betrayed whom first. And the best part? Jessica had no idea if she was the one who had given it to him. She had been reckless, after all. Ryan's findings had confirmed that. Her infidelity hadn't started with Richard, and it certainly hadn't ended there. She had entertained more than just one lover while I was away. And now? Now she was paying the price for it. Still, I wasn't finished. I needed one last push to ensure everything unraveled completely. With Ryan's help, I sent an anonymous tip to one of the companies Richard had been dealing with, revealing inconsistencies in his financial records. A routine audit would be enough to send his world crashing down. The moment they started digging, they'd find every skeleton he had tried to bury, every scheme he had run, every dollar he had moved to keep his facade alive. The walls were closing in on him, and I wasn't even there to watch it happen. Jessica, meanwhile, was running out of options. The men she had been lining up in the background would start distancing themselves as soon as they learned about her little medical predicament. It wasn't just her reputation that was in ruins, it was her entire future. She had played the game for years, moving from man to man, taking what she wanted and leaving destruction in her wake. But this time, she had miscalculated. She had underestimated the one person who knew her best. Now, she was trapped. And I was the one who had set the snare. Jessica ran. The moment her carefully constructed world began to crumble, she did what she had always done, she searched for a way out. At first, it was desperation. My phone rang constantly, her name flashing across the screen at all hours of the night. The voicemails started piling up, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. Gone was the arrogance, the smug superiority she had once worn so effortlessly. Now, there was only fear. Regret. Pleading. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain. She wanted to tell me she had made a mistake, that she still loved me, that things had spiraled out of control and she didn't know how to fix them. She had no idea that I wasn't listening. I let her believe that she had a chance. Let her voice fill the silence, let her tears fall freely over the phone. She poured her heart out, expecting, hoping, that the man she had once controlled still existed on the other end of the line. And when she finally finished, when she waited breathlessly for my response, I gave her only 4 words. The silence that followed was deafening. The next time she called, I didn't pick up. The time after that, the number was blocked. Jessica had spent years playing games, using people, moving from one situation to the next without ever facing the consequences of her actions. But now, for the first time in her life, she had nowhere left to go. Richard had been her safety net, but now he was just as ruined as she was. The fallout from the medical report had been immediate. Jessica had lashed out at him in a blind panic, convinced that he had been the one to infect her. Accusations flew, their arguments spilling into public places, their dirty laundry becoming town gossip. Neighbors whispered. Friends distanced themselves. What had once been a scandalous but amusing affair turned into something grotesque, something people no longer wanted to be associated with. Richard, once the confident, charming widower who had stolen my wife, was now a social pariah. The whispers followed him wherever he went, doors that were once open to him quietly shut. Business deals dried up. His closest allies suddenly had other things to do, too busy to take his calls, too cautious to be seen with him. And then came the final blow. The anonymous tip I had sent triggered an investigation into his finances. What had started as a quiet audit quickly spiraled into something worse. His employers found inconsistencies, funds that had been moved under questionable circumstances, a history of transactions that painted him as reckless at best and corrupt at worst. Richard had always been careful, always operated just within the margins of plausible deniability. But with the audit underway, it was no longer about what he could explain away, it was about what they could prove. And they proved plenty. The day he lost his job, I imagined him sitting alone in the house that used to be mine, realizing that everything he had traded me for had led him to this moment. Jessica had already disappeared by then. Whatever affection she had once pretended to have for him had withered the moment his usefulness ran out. Without money, without security, without status, he was nothing to her. Just another mistake. Meanwhile, I took back what was mine. The house, once tainted by their betrayal, was wiped clean of their existence. I went through every room, every drawer, every hidden corner where they had left their mark. The sheets were burned. The furniture was replaced. The walls were repainted. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about reclaiming the future. Jessica fought in court, of course. She tried to paint herself as the victim, clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she had left. But she had no real case. Her infidelity was undeniable, her financial abuse laid bare for everyone to see. Every dollar she had stolen, every lie she had told, every betrayal she had tried to cover up, it was all there, in black and white. The judge had no sympathy for her. She left the courtroom with nothing. No house. No money. No one to turn to. She and my father had chosen each other over me. Now, they had no one. And that? That was justice.